Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls her age. While her friends spent weekends at shopping malls or beauty salons, she found peace at the local shooting range. Her father, a retired police officer, had taught her how to handle firearms when she was just 12 years old. Now, at 25, she was one of the few women who regularly visited the Riverside shooting range. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as Sarah pulled up in her small Honda. She could already hear the familiar sounds of gunfire echoing from inside the building. Taking a deep breath, she gathered her equipment bag and walked toward the entrance. The smell of gunpowder and the cool air conditioning hit her as she stepped inside. Behind the counter stood Mike, the friendly range officer who had known Sarah for years. His weathered face broke into a smile when he saw her. Mike had served in the military for 20 years before taking this job, and he respected anyone who took shooting seriously. "Morning, Sarah," Mike called out, checking his clipboard. "Lane 7 is open for you today?" Sarah nodded and signed the safety waiver, though she knew the rules by heart. She had been coming here twice a week for the past 3 years, ever since she started working as a security guard at the downtown office building. Her job required her to stay sharp with her weapon, but more than that, shooting helped her clear her mind. As she walked toward Lane 7, she noticed a group of 4 men in their 30s occupying the lanes next to hers. They wore expensive shooting gear and carried high-end rifles that probably cost more than Sarah made in 2 months. Their loud voices and cocky laughter filled the air as they bragged about their previous hunting trips and shooting competitions. "Did you see that 10-point buck I got last month?" one of them said, adjusting his designer shooting glasses. "One shot, clean kill. That's how it's done." Sarah quietly set up her equipment. She had brought her grandfather's old rifle today, a simple but reliable weapon that had been passed down through 3 generations. The woodstock was worn smooth from years of use, and the metal had developed a gentle patina. It wasn't fancy, but it was accurate in the right hands. The men next to her noticed her rifle and began whispering among themselves. Sarah tried to ignore them and focus on her breathing exercises. Her father had always taught her that shooting was 90% mental preparation and only 10% physical skill. "Look at that antique," one of the men said, not bothering to lower his voice. "Probably older than she is." Another man chuckled. "My grandfather had one like that. We use it as decoration now." Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she continued preparing for her first round. She had learned long ago that the best response to mockery was simply to perform well. Actions spoke louder than words, her father always said. The men began their shooting session with great fanfare. They took turns firing at targets placed 50 yards away, each shot followed by loud celebrations and high fives. Their expensive scopes and modern equipment helped them achieve decent groupings, though Sarah noticed their technique could use improvement. When it was Sarah's turn, she stepped up to the firing line and loaded her rifle. The familiar weight of the weapon felt comfortable in her hands. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering her father's voice. "Breathe in, breathe out, find your natural pause, and squeeze gently." Her first shot rang out, followed by silence. Sarah lowered her rifle and activated the target retrieval system. When the paper target came back, it showed a clean hit just outside the bullseye at 50 yards. The men burst into laughter. "Ooh, close but no cigar," one of them called out mockingly. "Maybe you should try the beginner targets at 25 yards. Or maybe stick to shooting photographs instead of real targets," another added, causing the group to laugh even harder. Sarah felt her face redden, but she maintained her composure. She reloaded and prepared for her second shot. This time, she took extra time to steady herself and control her breathing. The mockery from the men continued, but she forced herself to block it out. Her second shot was better, landing closer to the center of the target, but it still wasn't the bullseye she was hoping for. The men's laughter grew louder and more obnoxious. "2 strikes!" one of them shouted. "Maybe 3rd time's the charm, but I doubt it." Sarah loaded her rifle for the third attempt, her hands slightly shaking from the pressure and embarrassment. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the range watching her now, waiting to see if she would fail again. The weight of expectations and mockery pressed down on her shoulders like a heavy blanket. Sarah took a deep breath and raised her rifle for the third time. The laughter and whispers from the men beside her seemed to echo in her ears. She tried to remember her father's training, but the pressure was getting to her. Her heartbeat thundered in her chest, and sweat formed on her palms despite the air conditioning. She lined up her shot carefully, adjusting her stance and checking her sight alignment twice. The target seemed to waver slightly in her vision, a sign that her nerves were affecting her concentration. Behind her, she could hear one of the men whisper to his friend, "$10 says she misses completely this time." Sarah squeezed the trigger gently, just as her father had taught her years ago. The rifle kicked back against her shoulder, and the sharp crack of the gunshot filled the air. But something felt wrong immediately. She knew even before looking that the shot had gone wide. When she activated the target retrieval system, her worst fears were confirmed. The paper came back without a new hole anywhere near the center. In fact, there was no new hole at all. She had completely missed the target. The men erupted in laughter so loud that other shooters in the range turned to look. "Air ball!" one of them shouted, using a basketball term. "Complete whiff!" "I told you guys," another said between laughs. "That old rifle belongs in a museum, not on a firing line." The tallest man in the group, who seemed to be their leader, walked over to Sarah's lane. "Listen, sweetheart," he said with a condescending smile. "Maybe shooting isn't for you. Have you considered taking up something more suitable? Like knitting or cooking classes?" His friends found this hilarious, slapping each other on the back and wiping tears from their eyes. Sarah felt smaller with each passing second. She had been shooting for 13 years and had never experienced such a complete miss at this distance. The embarrassment was overwhelming. Other people in the range began to stare and whisper. Sarah noticed an elderly couple at the far end shaking their heads sympathetically. A teenage boy with his father pointed in her direction and said something that made his father frown and shake his head disapprovingly. Mike, the range officer, watched the situation from behind the counter. His expression was serious, and he seemed to be considering whether to intervene. Sarah caught his eye for a moment, and she saw something there that surprised her. Instead of pity or disappointment, his eyes held a knowing look, almost as if he was waiting for something. The leader of the mocking group wasn't finished. "You know what your problem is," he continued, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're trying to use equipment that's beyond your skill level. That rifle might have been good enough for your great-grandfather, but modern shooting requires modern tools." He gestured toward his expensive rifle with its high-powered scope and tactical accessories. "This baby cost me $3,000, and it shows. Technology beats tradition every time." Sarah's hands trembled as she began to pack up her equipment. The humiliation was too much to bear. She had come to the range to practice and improve her skills, not to be made into a public spectacle. All she wanted now was to leave and never come back. "Hey, don't leave yet," one of the men called out. "We're just getting started. Maybe you can watch us and learn something." They returned to their lanes and began showing off with rapid-fire sequences and trick shots. Each successful hit was accompanied by loud cheering and comments clearly intended for Sarah to hear. "See how it's done?" the leader said after hitting a bullseye. "Proper equipment in capable hands." Sarah zipped up her rifle case with shaking fingers. 13 years of shooting, hundreds of hours of practice, and it all came down to one missed shot that made her look like a complete amateur. She thought about her father and how disappointed he would be if he knew she was giving up because of some bullies. But the embarrassment was too fresh, too painful. She slung her equipment bag over her shoulder and turned to leave. As she walked toward the exit, the men's laughter followed her like a shadow. Just as she reached the door, Mike's voice cut through the noise like a knife. "Hey, Sarah," he called out, his voice carrying an authority that immediately silenced the entire range. "Before you go, don't you think you should check what happened to your shot?" Sarah stopped and turned around, confusion written across her face. "What do you mean? I missed completely." Mike walked out from behind the counter, his military bearing evident in every step. He looked directly at the group of men who had been mocking Sarah, and his expression was stern. "That's where you're wrong," he said quietly. "And that's where these gentlemen are wrong, too." The four men stopped laughing and looked at Mike with uncertainty. Something in his tone suggested that their fun was about to come to an end. Mike continued walking until he stood directly between Sarah and her tormentors. "Sarah, you didn't miss your target," he said clearly. "Your shot was perfect. These men just don't know where to look." The silence in the range was now complete. Every person stopped what they were doing to listen. Sarah stared at Mike in confusion, while the four men exchanged worried glances. "What are you talking about?" the leader of the group demanded. "We all saw her miss. There's no hole in her target." Mike smiled for the first time since the incident began. It wasn't a friendly smile. "Turn around," Mike said simply, his voice carrying absolute authority. "All of you, turn around and look at the back wall." Everyone in the range slowly turned to face the rear wall, which stood about 200 yards behind the firing line. Sarah squinted in confusion, trying to understand what Mike wanted them to see. The back wall was made of thick concrete and was painted white with safety warnings and range rules posted at regular intervals. Mike reached into his pocket and pulled out a small pair of binoculars. He handed them to the leader of the group who had been mocking Sarah. "Look at the very center of the back wall," he instructed. "Tell me what you see." The man reluctantly took the binoculars and focused them on the distant wall. After a moment, his confident expression began to change. His mouth opened slightly, and the color drained from his face. I see a bullet hole," he stammered, lowering the binoculars. "That's right," Mike said loudly so everyone in the range could hear. "Sarah didn't miss her target. She was shooting at a completely different target that none of you even knew existed." He walked over to a control panel on the wall and pressed several buttons. Suddenly, a target holder descended from the ceiling at the 200-yard mark, far behind where everyone had been looking. When it stopped, everyone could see that it held a small target, much smaller than the standard ones used at 50 yards. The target was no bigger than a playing card, and in its center was a perfect bullet hole. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mike announced, "what you just witnessed was a precision shot at 200 yards using iron sights only. No scope, no modern technology, just pure skill and years of training." The silence in the range was deafening. Sarah stared at Mike in amazement, finally understanding what had happened. She had been so nervous and flustered by the mockery that she had forgotten about the special target Mike had set up for her weekly precision training. Mike continued his explanation, his voice filled with pride. "Sarah Martinez holds the women's state record for long-distance precision shooting with iron sights. She's also a certified instructor who has trained dozens of law enforcement officers, including several who work in this city." He turned to look directly at the four men who had been laughing at her. "That antique rifle you were mocking? It's a custom-built precision instrument that has won more shooting competitions than all of your expensive equipment combined. Sarah's grandfather was a Marine sniper in World War II, and that rifle has been passed down through 3 generations of expert marksmen." The men stood in stunned silence, their faces red with embarrassment. Other shooters in the range began to applaud, and Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes, but this time they were tears of relief and joy rather than humiliation. Mike wasn't finished. "Sarah comes here twice a week to maintain her skills because her job requires absolute precision. She works as head of security for a federal building downtown, and she's responsible for protecting hundreds of lives every day. The shot she just made could save someone's life in a real-world situation." He walked over to Sarah and placed a fatherly hand on her shoulder. I've been watching her shoot for 3 years, and I've never seen her miss a target she was actually aiming for. When she missed her 50-yard target, I knew exactly what had happened. She had switched her focus to the precision target without realizing it, probably because the stress made her fall back on muscle memory from her advanced training. Sarah wiped her eyes and found her voice. I was so nervous because of their laughing that I automatically went into precision mode. It's what my father taught me to do under pressure. I didn't even realize I was aiming at the 200-yard target. Mike nodded approvingly. That's what real training does. When the pressure is on, you don't fall apart. You perform at an even higher level. The leader of the mocking group stepped forward, his expensive rifle hanging limply in his hands. We owe you an apology, he said quietly. We had no idea. No, you didn't, Mike replied firmly. You assumed that because she was a woman using an older rifle, she couldn't possibly be skilled. You let your prejudices make you foolish. He addressed the entire range. This is why we have rules about respecting other shooters. You never know who you're dealing with. Sarah has forgotten more about shooting than most people will ever learn. Sarah finally felt confident enough to speak up. Thank you, Mike, she said softly. And thank you for believing in me even when I didn't believe in myself. The 4 men quietly gathered their equipment and left the range without another word. As they walked out, Sarah heard one of them say to another, I feel like an idiot. Did you see that shot? Other shooters approached Sarah to congratulate her and ask about her training. The elderly couple she had noticed earlier came over to shake her hand, and the teenager with his father asked if she gave lessons. I do teach on weekends, Sarah told them, her confidence returning. Mike can give you my information if you're interested. As the range returned to normal activity, Mike walked with Sarah back to her lane. You know, he said with a smile, that was probably the best shooting lesson those guys will ever receive. Sometimes people need to be humbled before they can learn to respect others. Sarah packed up her grandfather's rifle with new appreciation for its legacy. My father always said this rifle would teach me important lessons, she reflected. I just never expected one of them to be about standing up to bullies. The best lessons usually come when we least expect them, Mike replied. Now how about we set up some more precision targets? I think you're just getting warmed up. Sarah smiled and unpacked her rifle once again. This time, when she stepped up to the firing line, she felt the quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're capable of. The mockery was forgotten, replaced by the satisfaction of a job well done and respect earned.